Look, I've been coming behind this mic, every week when we're here, sometimes for half an hour, and I've been basically taking the bark off our brothers and sisters on the left because my belief that so much of the policy here hurts people. And I've shown over and over and over, the working poor are getting poorer, the poor are getting poorer, the middle class. I mean, I actually last week had charts here that showed in my Phoenix, Scottsdale area, we have the highest inflation in the continental United States. You get to functionally work a month and a half now for free, just because of the change in our inflation index. And even when you plug in any salary growth we've had in our marketplace, you're functionally donating over a month of labor that you get no purchasing power for, no compensation. That's inflation. But I thought, why not come behind the mic? Because I've tried in those previous speeches to turn to my brothers and sisters in the majority, the Democrat side, and say, hey, here's some things we could do policy-wise to take on inflation. Inflation is not just a monetary issue. It's also things we can do on the policy, the fiscal side. So I thought I would go to Crazy Town for a moment and actually show some things that are optimistic. And the fact of the matter is a lot of them aren't necessarily right or left. They're just technology adoption. But we got to stop doing the dumb. Sorry, I think it's a break of decorum if I curse on the floor, so you can fill in the blank there. But the virtue signaling, like we just did a half an hour ago on this floor, it's theater. I understand the polling numbers are miserable for my brothers and sisters on the left. Great. So they're going to throw out every virtue signaling vote, whether it be actually legal or mechanically sensible or even have any place in reality. So let's go to what's really going on and some things that would be good that we could do together. First off, we need to understand the scale of how much trouble we're in. And this slide is almost a year old. But the fact of the matter is we're in a world right now where your government is an insurance company with an army. It's a way to think about it. We're an insurance company with an army. When you start to understand over the next 30 years, Medicare and Social Security are 100% of the future debt. And that future debt, from last year's CBO number, is $112 trillion in today's value. And if you add in inflation, our calculations are now blowing through $120 trillion of borrowed money. Now, the fact of the matter is almost every modeler says we can never get there. We blow up long before that. But you got to understand, mandatory, that's Social Security, it's Medicare, it's other things we've made that are formula. Over here is defense, and over here is other domestic programs. Only about 13, actually I think this coming year it may be even less, of everything we spend is really FBI, it's environment, it's research, it's this tiny sliver down here. But the reality of what is driving that mandatory monster that is consuming everything? It's Medicare. About 3/4 of all the spending, about 3/4 of all the debt that is coming is Medicare. The vast majority of Medicare comes out of the general fund. It's health care costs. So the brain trust around here, we'll do things like the ACA, Obamacare, the Republican alternative, Medicare for all. They are all financing bills. We play games around here. It's about, who gets subsidized, who has to pay. A number of the boards I'm going to show today are about healthcare disruption to change not who pays, but what we pay. There's a reason you don't go back to Blockbuster Video anymore. There was a technology revolution where you no longer go wait in line at the local strip mall, get a little silver disc, take it home, and half the time, 3/4 of the time, you couldn't get the silver disc you wanted because someone else already had it. Today, you go home and hit a button, and you got dozens of streaming services. That's a technology disruption. And if Blockbuster Video had hired enough lobbyists, this place would have slowed down the internet to make sure Netflix couldn't exist. You need to think about what goes on here. So let's actually start to walk through an understanding of how much trouble we really are in. This board is functionally a year or two old. But you start to add in, when you do Social Security and health care entitlements, it's this line. The rest of the budget is actually in decline or flat. Defense is down here. You can functionally wipe out every dime of defense, and you functionally can't keep up with the growth of the debt being caused by Social Security and Medicare. And that's not Republican or Democrat. We got old as a society. Does anyone ever hear about baby boomers? Because this place basically didn't figure out baby boomers existed until the last couple years. It's demographics. And it's happening all over the industrialized world. And when you actually look at our numbers, and we're working on this right now in our office, of what's happened the last couple of years, sort of the post-COVID baby bust. Remember, last year was the lowest fertility rate in U.S. history. The math is getting really ugly. I'm the ranking Republican over Social Security. And we had the Social Security actuary report come out a couple weeks ago. It said, hey, we've added a whole year. We now have, 11, 12 years before Social Security runs out of cash. And we live just on the revenues. But they missed inflation. They also screwed up, I believe, on the fertility rates, population growth. So let's start to walk through. If healthcare costs are the primary driver of U.S. sovereign debt, what can you and I do? What could this place do? And some of this stuff will not work. But damn it, we need to try. We do enough virtue signaling here where we say pretty words and then we walk off the floor and say, well, that's never going to actually happen, but damn it, it's a great campaign ad. Maybe it's time we start to try to do some of the things that are really difficult. So some basic math. And first come down to this line. 33% of all healthcare spending is associated with diabetes. That's type 2 and some type 1, but mostly type 2. 33% of all healthcare spending. 31% of all Medicare spending. Why wouldn't you absolutely fixate? And look, we won't call it Operation Warp Speed because that had something to do with Donald Trump and the left, despises him. So give it any damn name you want. But come on, people. If I came to you and said 33% of all of our healthcare spending, 31% of all Medicare spending is diabetes, and Medicare is the primary driver of U.S. sovereign debt, can't we hold hands together and jump and say, we're going to throw everything we have at this because we know there's been a breakthrough? Now, it's only like a half a dozen people who've been cured of type 1 diabetes, and we don't have any long-term data on it, but it's optimism. But first, I want to go over my frustration, and you'll see this as a policy split on the way the brains around here work differently between my brothers and sisters on the left and those of us on the right. So a few weeks ago, this place committed to give, I think it was $36 billion, might be 38, but I remember $36 billion of functionally cash subsidies to big pharma who they were railing against, saying they're charging too much for insulin. And the way we're going to stop these crazy insulin prices is we're going to give a bunch of cash to the very people we think are charging too much. Does anyone see this absurdity? Instead of creating, hey, we're going to incentivize competition, we're going to put more people in the marketplace, we're going to make the systems work. No, because the left is addicted to handing out cash. Well, it turns out at the same time they're doing that, not too far from here in Virginia, there's functionally a co-op that's been put together years ago that's in construction right now that's going to bring a number of generic insulins to market at less than the new subsidized price. And the fact of the matter is what the Democrats did a few weeks ago on trying to subsidize Big Pharma's insulin production may have blown up some of the economics and the financing behind this. Why wouldn't we have said for a fraction of the money, saying we're going to set aside some money, we're going to help these folks get their permitting, their reviews, we're going to actually put FDA reviewers on site as they're building so the day it's clean, the clean rooms are up and ready, it can be in production. Add competition, not subsidies. And it exists. And think about this. They're talking about $55 for a whole box, $30 per vial. That's cheaper than the legislation we passed a few weeks ago where we're handing out, what, $36 billion of subsidies to Big Pharma. You see the craziness around here. Is the virtue signaling was more important than actually something it made people's lives better. And actually added optionality and competition. Why don't we, and this isn't Republican or Democrat, this is a solution. But I guess there's a hell of a lot more power, maybe better fundraising opportunities when you're handing out $36 billion to the very people you rail against, and then wink, wink, nod, nod, here's the cash. This place has absolutely become perverse. So back to where I was going. I've talked about this over and over because it's one of my personal fixations. The discussion of an end to insulin, where there's actually been, and this, we saw the first academic article on this back last December, and we try to track it functionally every week. We try to follow what's going on. One of the trials is actually in FDA phase 1 hold right now as they're doing some safety efficacy. But the fact of the matter is we have a half a dozen Americans who through a stem cell, and now the newest latest is they're taking it and apparently tagging it with CRISPR mechanism so the body doesn't see it as foreign. So the elegance of that is that means that this mechanism works. You could do a production line of these insulin-producing cells. Islet cells, I always get made fun of because I mispronounce that. But the ability to get someone's body to produce insulin again, why isn't this just excitement around here? Remember, 33% of all healthcare spending is associated with diabetes. If there's a potential, just a potential, we can cure our brothers and sisters. And yes, it's going to cause all sorts of difficult decisions around here when you start dealing with type 2. I represent the population with the second highest per capita population of diabetes in the nation. My tribal community is Salt River, Pima, Maricopa, amazing community, smart, well-run, and genetically they're number 2 and their sister tribe is number 1 of population that has diabetes. Next year we're going to be doing the Farm Bill. Within there will be nutrition support. One of the ways this place has always passed the farm subsidy bills and nutrition support is they merge them together. How about if I came to you and said, let's just have a really uncomfortable conversation instead of the EBT card, which is sort of the modern day food stamp. If you have someone who wants to sign up for the program saying we are going to try to cure your body and get your body to make insulin again, but you got to do the nutrition program with us. And that may be 2 years of a food box showing up 3 times a day at your house where it's microwavable, Lyft can drop it off. But what's more elegant? What's more, from a society standpoint, what's kinder? Is here's an EBT card. Go to Jack in the Box. I love the onion rings, and you can use the EBT card at Jack in the Box. Is that really making society healthy better? Because we've also been doing some experiments in the Joint Economic Committee, just trying to do math and starting to realize health. The fact you have a household member who has severe diabetes that may be getting a foot heading to being cut off is a component in income inequality. I thought that was the holy grail to my brothers and sisters on the left. Let's try to make our brothers and sisters healthier. And the fact of the matter is there's something going on out there in the literature. Why wouldn't we take some of the dollars we spend here, the things we put into pure theater, and say, this science is already in phase 1. Whether it be through tax incentives, whether it be through other types of incentives, how do we get this into the field? And then we, as a body, have to do really difficult discussion. Because you're not going to give someone stem cells to get their pancreas to start producing insulin again if they're still morbidly obese. We've got to have, I mean, this is a big boy conversation, a big person conversation, knowing we're not allowed to use gender identity anymore. But what's merciful? What would be great for the budget? What would be great for society? What would be great for productivity? Because at the end of the speech, my hook is going to be, inflation is killing our country. It's blowing up our future of young people. It's eating the savings of older people. How do you get productivity back in the society? It's actually disruptions. It turns out if you can disrupt things like this, you have this virtuous circle. And how many times does this body even talk about doing big things that are actually really good for everyone? And if it's true, you would think the majority here, which basically controls all the power, one of the first things they would have done is invited the researchers who had gotten together with CRISPR and the stem cell and brought them in here and said, let's have a conversation. How real is this? How far off in it? What resources, what incentives, what things could we do in the capital stack to get money to invest in it? What could we do as a body? Because if this is really 33% of all healthcare spending is associated with diabetes, could you imagine? Even if it was a fraction of that population of our brothers and sisters were removed from the suffering. I have pitched over and over and over people with power in this body saying, invite the researchers here. We need to understand this. And instead, over and over, my brothers and sisters on the left seem to say, no, we care more. We're going to build more diabetes clinics. We're going to build more community-based clinics. And I'm saying the disruption is the solution. Cure the damn disease. And it's going to be hard. And there will be things that will go wrong. And there will be people who will call us names because we're trying to say, well, we need to do the nutrition and maybe some exercises. We get ready to make this investment in you. But it's the moral thing to do for our society and also economically really smart. And let alone also think of the economic expansion we get when we live in a society where we have so many of our brothers and sisters who can't participate in the economy because parts of their lives are miserable, their health issues. The cure is the solution. Patching people up it may be great virtue signaling, but it's not that merciful. So that's sort of the theme I'm going to walk through these boards. So now let's go through other things we could do as a society to disrupt. So how many times have we all been here on the floor and we hear about the Build Back Better? Yes, we can spend more money and that will be good for inflation. And you sit there and scratch your head and say, my elementary school economics teacher was wrong. But they're working on it in the Senate. We're being told there's a pared back version coming. In that pared back version, would you believe there's a provision that you can't automate the ports in California? Huh? Okay, you got to back up and think about this. So I have a White House and some of my brothers and sisters here on the left. Inflation isn't their fault. It's not the incredible amounts of spending, the trillions of dollars being handed out to people without any requirement for them to participate in the society or economy. It's not their fault. It's supply chains. And one of the first things they really want to do is a piece of legislation that would restrict automating the ports. Huh? Because there's a worker shortage, there is a technology shortage, we have ships parked out, but the longshoremen write checks to Democrats, so they'll slow down. You can't have it both ways. So the fact of the matter is, the language is there. I've had a number of people look at me and say, oh, that can't be. No, it got slipped in, and it's still over there in the Senate draft. This is absurd. Because I will argue the technology is, the disruption is the cure. So it's not only automating the ports, it's the second half. There's some brilliant articles out there of some technology now that the rail spurs in the Port of Long Beach, the Port of Los Angeles, some of the others, you could actually now, and this is some former SpaceX engineers that have designed this, and you take the container, you park it on the electric rail car, and you tell it where to go, and it just goes automatically to the spur to drop it off, this and that. It functionally, you go from an automated port to an automated travel delivery system. That's forward thinking. That's policy. That's rule sets that pop that productivity, pop the problems in the supply chain. Ta-da! You did something positive, and when you do that, you also take on inflation. And instead, this body's trying to stop the very disruptions that would make our lives better. because they're pandering to a group that writes them a check. But it exists. I mean, there's fun articles about, these automated freight train cars, and they're electric. You just, boom, put the container on it, tell it where to go. Why wouldn't we be? Look, we have a demographic crisis. We have trouble with workers. We have all these things. The technology, the disruption is the solution. Do you see any attempt around here? Instead, we have debates here where we sound like it's still the 1990s. So one of the other battles here is energy prices. And I've had an ongoing, reasonably friendly discussion with a Democrat who's from back east, who's a friend. We'll call him a friend. We got to stop hydrocarbon. Oh, natural gas isn't as clean. Oh, David, you don't understand. Yes, natural gas, when properly burnt for energy, those things may be 40 to 50% cleaner than other fuel sources, but you have methane leakage. Okay, I'll do that with you. And we know the methane math, the latest calc is like 8.79 to 1 in its greenhouse effect if you do the math, but it also has, as we know, the new math is it has a much shorter half-life, so we're having to rebuild. That's why so many of the models of global warming models from a year or two ago are absolutely wrong, because we're now recalculating methane. But it turns out that some experiments have been going on the last 2 years of functionally a solution to capturing methane, particularly in oil and gas and pipelines. And I'm going to be a little silly here because it's a dirt cheap solution. It's clay. Turns out, I think it's a copper oxided clay, is like a sponge of methane. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But there's a couple good academic papers saying, hey, you do realize we could functionally take kitty litter, pack it into wellheads, pack it into the pipe fittings, pack it into the other things, and it's a methane sponge. Why wouldn't we take a run at this? Instead, the Malthusians around here basically run this place and say, no, we're going to restrict ourselves. We're going to restrict because, oh God, we can't have access to this. Oh, no. The solution is in the disruption. I'm just excited about this one because it's super cheap. It's not some of the grandiose, build a new regulatory body, build an inspection, build these huge tankers that sit on top of the wellheads and capture the methane. Turns out it could be functionally copper oxided kitty litter. Does anyone around here read? So I've had a proposal here, and for anyone who is bored out of their mind, I believe I'm allowed to say this on the floor. If not, you scold me later. Schweikert environmental crowdsourcing. There's a YouTube video I put together a couple of years ago that basically said, look, we all walk around with these supercomputers in our pocket. What if I came to you tomorrow and said, instead of the regulatory model we use right now to protect air quality, and you could use this for water and other things, where functionally you fill out pieces of paper, you take them to your local regulatory body, EPA, county air quality, whatever you have in your area, and they stick it in a file cabinet. And everyone knows file cabinets full of pieces of paper make the air quality better, right? No, it's documentation so one day someone can sue you. What would happen if I came to you and said, they exist today, they're not expensive. If you had a couple thousand people in your marketplace, a few thousand, something like Maricopa County, which is huge, had a little attachment on their phone, and it does air quality samples. You crowdsource the problem. You no longer need people filling out pieces of paper for their permitting, because if someone screws up, you catch them immediately. And the elegance of this is the clowns that may be painting cars in their backyard behind your house, they're never getting a permit. They're never getting caught unless you had a crowdsource model where the UPS driver, the soccer mom, everyone else is walking around with a little thing attached to their phone, or it's Bluetooth on the car attached on the side. And the beauty of these things, they do PM10, they do volatile organics. There's even one out there, a little panel that actually does radioactive, which there was a discussion of putting those on like UPS vans. The solutions are out there, and think of how different the world would be. I want to open up a motorcycle paint shop. I have to go get engineer to stamp my air quality permit. I have to go get the scrubbers. I have to do this, do this, do this, do this. What if the solution is, hey, here's the things you have to do. You don't need a permit because the moment you screw up, we catch you that same day. It's a living, I mean, do any of you use Waze when you go driving? It's a living crowdsourced model. These ideas exist out there. Would, in Detroit where they had the water issue, there's a little ring out there that's like $39. You could have put it under the sink and you would have caught it. You could have crowdsourced the information, not gone through, multi-billion dollars of misery. The unwillingness of this place to understand what century we're in. So if someone gets bored, take a look at that YouTube video. It sort of explains the concept. The other things, for those of us in the West, this is a crazy one, but it's worth thinking about. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Desalinization. We know there's a number of desalinization plants along the coast of California. There's even some discussions of some in Mexico and other places and around the world. But there's always an issue with the brine. You've got to really, spread the brine out so you don't, create intense areas. But now there's some researchers out there that are going, hey, that brine, did you know? There may be all sorts of really neat stuff in that. There may be rare earths. We could actually, as the desalinization plant is mining potable water, we could be mining the brine for rare earths. I'm just begging the people around here, think a little more creatively. Because this place is absolutely dystopian anymore. And there are solutions out there. Is this Republican or Democrat? I'm sure someone will make a contribution to one side or the other, and then immediately the other side will say, well, that's a Republican idea. But the fact of the matter is, it's worth at least understanding. And it turns out, I have an absolute fascination with carbon capture. There's actually a tax credit in those things that I'm the lead author on that's out there in law and other things. And the breakthroughs, it turns out we're getting really good at this. There's ambient, where they're actually pulling it out of the air. There's point source. There's actually a power generation outside Houston called an Allen cycle, where they actually blow up the natural gas, and they don't heat up steam to throw the turbine. They use the actual gas from the burn. And it has no smokestack. They capture every bit of it. Well, it turns out we're actually getting really good. And all over the world, there's researchers spending time on this. There was even an amazing paper about 2 years ago. MIT came up with a nanotubed electric charge plates that go on, off, but it crashed the cost, absolutely crashed the cost of capturing, and they were doing it ambient. They were just blowing air across it. And it crashed the energy to do carbon capture. Okay, so my brothers and sisters on the left say they're the ones that care about the environment. Okay, but we're the ones actually doing the policy that's practical, that works, that we don't actually put ourselves back in the Stone Age, and options to grab the carbon. And there's multiple versions of this. This is actually, there's an actual facility, I think this one actually may be in Canada, and yes, it has Gates Foundation money and others, and this one is in active ambient capture. Apparently it does amazing things, and this technology is only a couple years old, and it's already out of date. The technology is moving so fast. This isn't pie in the sky, this isn't theoretical, they exist. What could we do policy-wise, other than me doing the 45, in the tax code to try to say, hey, we're going to give you a tax credit for carbon you've captured if you sequester it or put it in concrete or other things. Are there things we could do? And this becomes a moment where those of us who believe the use of hydrocarbons is basically keeping a society prosperous, and my brothers and sisters on the left that want to eliminate hydrocarbons, maybe there's a technology solution that brings us together. It's worth understanding and working on. How many detailed hearings have we seen here where we brought in the engineers? Not the talking heads, not the lobbyists, Not an idiot, another idiot doing virtue signaling for us, but the actual engineers. You know, those types where you have to have a conversation where you own a calculator. But this stuff exists. So there's other revolutions happening around us that are incredible opportunities, very scary, very wonderful. So we're going to do the Farm Bill next year. I grabbed this article almost 2 years ago, and we've been tracking it, and they've had some success. And I'm going to geek out for a couple seconds. I'll try to do this as quickly and lightly as I can. Do you all remember your high school biology class? C4 plants, C3 plants. Okay, these plants actually, you know, they need a carbon molecule to grow because they turned it into a sugar. But the dear Lord, there's actually this weird little glitch where sometimes the plant grabs an oxygen molecule and it goes, oh, I don't need this. And it spends its energy purging the oxygen molecule and going back trying to get a carbon. What would happen if researchers, through a little synthetic biology, could tweak it so every time it grabbed the carbon? Some of the researchers think for some plants that could be a 40. Now, on some of the other articles I'm reading, it's down in some, for other types of plants, it might be in the 20s, 25, 28, there's a 30. But think about it. If I had a crop that could grow 40% more efficiently, 40% less land, 40% less fertilizer, 40% less water, the disruption to the world, you basically just fed the world for the next century. And worldwide agriculture functionally produces 2.2 times more global greenhouse gases, I guess is the term the left uses, than every car on Earth. 2.2 times more. So if I had a 40% improvement, just this synthetic biology in plants would be equal to removing every car off the face of the Earth. Now, we all know the math is going to turn out that way. And yes, there'll be lots of people who resist it because they're scared of technology. But why wouldn't we have this part of our conversation if we care about those of us that live in drought-prone areas, care about the environment, but care about feeding the world? This is the future. What's the chance anything like this will be part of the Farm Bill next year? Pretty much zero. Because it's a disruption of technology, and this place basically has become a protection racket. We protect incumbents, not incumbent members of Congress, incumbent business models, incumbent associations, incumbent bureaucracies. We don't ask them to leap into the future. This is the future. So this one is I use on occasion. It's fairly snarky, but I think it makes a point. How many care about plastic in the ocean? Oh, the hands go up. You know, here in D.C., I don't think we're allowed to use plastic straws because everyone knows D.C. plastic straws were critical to ocean-wide plastic, except there's almost no plastic from North America in the ocean. Turns out 90% of the plastic in the ocean comes from 10 rivers, 8 in Asia, 2 in Africa. 90% of the plastic in the ocean comes from 10 rivers, 8 in Asia, 2 in Africa. So if you actually cared about plastic in the ocean, would you be writing your checks, or in this case, your credit card, to groups that go out and say, we're going to go out and capture plastic? Great. Or wouldn't we adjust some of our technical foreign aid, our response and environmental aid, saying we're going to go to those 10 rivers, 8 in Asia, 2 in Africa, and we're going to do something like we're going to create a value for the plastic. And all of a sudden I have an economic solution of, oh, instead of dumping it in the river, we're going to go collect it. See, this is an actual solution. The problem is the solution takes away the virtue signaling. This place lives on telling great stories, demonstrating you care. It doesn't give a darn about actual solutions. "90% of the ocean plastic comes from 10 rivers. Go to those rivers and let's deal with it." Another thought experiment, and now I'm going to do a lot more on healthcare. I accept a number of these will not work. I accept a number of these will make some people angry because it blows up their business model. Remember, money, power, vanity, but most of the time DC is about the money. But what is the single most powerful thing this place could do tomorrow? If I said, between now and the end of the year, I want to have a disruption in the cost of health care. But David, that's only a few months. DC's not capable of actually setting off a revolution in a few months to actually do something powerful for the price of health care. What if I came to you tomorrow and said, the models say, the research says, and this is one we've known for years and years and years, 16% of all healthcare spending is actually people not taking their medicine. Not taking it properly, not taking it all. So if you have hypertension and you don't take your calcium inhibitor, you have high cholesterol, you don't take your statin, turns out you stroke out, you have a heart attack, you cost the system a fortune. You stay on your meds, actually they're cheap, they're safe, they're very effective. We have decades and decades of history on their effectiveness. You stay healthy. Turns out you could actually just say for certain types of pharmaceuticals, put the 99-cent pill cap on it that beeps at you when you didn't open it today. If you want to do the fancy one, this slide's a little, year or two old. There's the fancy one where the pill cap actually talks to your phone, and the phone tells you you didn't take it. 16% of U.S. health care costs be about $570 billion a year, so over $500 billion a year. What would happen if tomorrow this place got together and said, hey, for some of our populations that we know are likely to miss taking their pills, or grandma's having some cognitive issues, or someone's just really busy in their life, let's spend the 99 cents on the pill bottle, give them the thing that beeps when it's not open. If that actually helped even a fraction, maybe it's not 16%, but what if we were able to do half of that? We're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. Is this Republican or Democrat? It smacks us in the face. There's just no constituency here lobbying or writing us checks for this. The solution is in the disruption. The disruption is part of the technology. And before I do this slide, I need to tell a story and see if I can put this in perspective. And look, there's a reason here I seem to just annoy the hell out of so many folks, because this is a challenge to how we think. A few years ago, I'm reading one of my crazy blogs, and it's just it's a material science blog, oddly enough. And a professor, I think it was Duke, I may have the university wrong, she'd been working on this thing where a breath biopsy, you could put breath across it, and it could actually designate, hey, you have this category of flu. Okay? And the model basically said, once we know that category, we can bounce off your medical records on your phone, and it could just automatically order your antivirals. And it's been worked on and worked on and worked on. So think of this. It's a flu kazoo. You blow into it, and it can designate, and the latest models, experiments now, are picking up dead cancer proteins. So a cell dies, it throws off a DNA strip. Some of the sensors are getting so good, they can actually identify them. What's the problem with something like a breath biopsy? I wish I had some brothers and sisters here in the body to yell at me. What's the problem with it? You blow into it, it bangs off your medical records and orders your antivirals. What's the problem with it? It's illegal. I'm allowing an algorithm to prescribe. Social Security Act says I'll see a doctor, not an algorithm. Now, the fact of the matter is, wink, wink, nod, nod, if you have someone with diabetic pump and that talks to their phone, they already have an algorithm that's prescribing, and they've been doing it for years. This is not new. And if you had it certified by the FDA, and there are algorithms certified by the FDA, why wouldn't we make them reimbursable? Why wouldn't we do some simple conceptual ideas that you could actually have technology in your home medicine cabinet that you lick, you spit, you urinate, you blow into, whatever it is, and you can monitor your health? That technology exists today, but one of the reasons the capital stack won't invest in it, it's functionally illegal. And they're basically betting that the lobbyist armies will keep it illegal here. Because, gotta be honest, it will change the foot traffic in many of our medical facilities. It will also save the society from the debt implosion that's being driven by the future healthcare costs. So you got to decide, are you going to save us? Are we going to protect the world from a disruption? It's back to my Blockbuster Video example. Should Congress have stopped Netflix or streaming and protected, the renting of the little silver discs? Because that's functionally what we do in healthcare. There's technology out there coming, the newest versions of folks with the Apple Watches. The reality, if I can know your O2, your temperature, your pulse rates, the algorithm can say, hey, you might have a problem here. What happens when the new versions are stunningly accurate? We have math for a number of these that are more accurate than a human. And yes, it is scary. Disruption always is. And if we don't have a disruption in the cost of health care, there's a technical economic term. We are screwed. And there's lots of these at-home biopsy type. You've all seen the one, because it had some great pop culture last year, of an iPhone app where you could zoom in on a mole. And the algorithm behind it was stunningly accurate to say, hey, you need to go get that thing cut off because that's a skin cancer. Why aren't we promoting things here? Look, I've been at war here since I got here on telehealth. And I had a piece of legislation over and over, and I could never get a hearing on it for telemedicine, telehealth here, until the pandemic hit, and then they functionally took our language, and I was actually doing this with a couple of my Democrat colleagues, and they took our telehealth expansion language and put it into law for the pandemic. Do you know the expansion of telehealth goes away the day the pandemic is declared over? And the argument used to be, well, David, you don't understand. Seniors aren't going to figure out how to hit the button and use FaceTime to talk to their doctor. Seniors aren't going to figure out how to put something on their wrist or on their chest or blow into it. You don't understand. Well, it turns out they were wrong. And I'm looking forward to this body deciding, are you going to be with the lobbyists or the expansion of access to health care through telehealth? Because this goes away when the pandemic is declared over. Here's another example, just another breath biopsy. These things exist. They've put them together, and what's fascinating is this slide's about a year or so old. It keeps going and going and going, and they're working now on a number where it's a breath biopsy to detect different types of cancers. Why? Why doesn't this place find joy and embrace the solutions? And you start to understand, outside the folks that politicized messenger RNA and didn't understand the mechanisms and all those things, but we are getting so close to treating so many diseases, whether it be my fascination with the stem cell, being able to set off insulin production again, to the fact that I'm going to show a number of slides here where cancers, an incredible number of the cancers, particularly soft cell, we can set off your body to fight them now using messenger RNA. But we're right on the cusp. If we actually, if I came to you right now and said, hey, malaria, certain cancers, HIV, influenza, heart disease. The heart disease one is fascinating, teaching your body through a messenger RNA how to build certain protein stacks to help rebuild heart damage. I mean, it's here. How much discussion do you have on this body? How many experts have we brought in saying, the technology is the cure. If healthcare is what's chewing us alive, do we do another bill on who's going to get subsidized and who has to pay? Do we do another, group saying, oh, there's a group out there we are not taxing enough. We need their cash to throw it into Medicare because we all know the crisis that's happening on Medicare financing. Why is this place incapable of having a conversation about crashing the price of healthcare. And I'm just going to go through a number of these because I collect these, obviously. When you spend 10 hours a week on an airplane and you bore easily, I read a lot of things and I keep coming across these. This one is just really interesting, an immunotherapy for brain cancer. Now, it's not the solid tumor, but they think they've had amazing success on this. And this was one of those we didn't think we could do anything with. And it looks like there's an immunotherapy for brain cancer. Here's one, and I have not read the details on this because I just saw this on my flight, I think, a couple days ago. Drug cures 100% of colorectal cancer patients in a small initial trial. Okay. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But this is what we need to be fixating on, and instead what we're going to do here is watch the bill that comes from the Senate where they're going to blow up the capital stack for the very research that finances these sorts of things. A couple more just for the fun of it. Biotech, and I think this one is already out in phase 1 and multiple phase 1s. I don't know if it's reached phase 2. Malaria. You do understand for much of the world, malaria is just a brutal, vicious disease. I saw some data a couple months ago. They were only about 30% effective. And believe it or not, that's actually terrific, because if they've hit 30% effective, we can through adjustments, through other factors, could you imagine the amount of misery you could end into the world if you get to a 50% effective vaccine for malaria? Instead, we will do certain types of foreign aid. Instead, turns out one of the most powerful things we could do for the world is our intellectual property. Fixing what we've incentivized. And it's not handouts of cash. It's fix the regulatory model here, fix the capital stacks, fix the tax incentives. And you do amazing things for the world. This one, I did a presentation last year, and I got a little over the top on getting a little technical, so I used to have about a dozen slides on this one. But it turns out we think we know how to do a type of gene editing with a couple other optionalities for sickle cell anemia. And this one's out there in trials. Isn't that a moral thing to do? The fact of the matter is, do you try to help people maintain their misery, or do you pursue, when you actually see data that says there's a path, do you pursue the cure? My argument here is the cure is better for us as a society, financially, productivity-wise, and just from a pure ethical, moral standpoint, removing someone's misery is a pretty neat thing to do. This is that heart disease one, which I just found fascinating, that through functionally a CAR T, which is the derivative of the mRNA, you're setting off your body, and in this case, instead of it going after a disease, it's actually repairing damage. And I actually think this one's coming out of the Boston area. And when you start to understand there's a reason these folks have Nobel Prizes, when you start to understand infectious diseases, herpes, other diabetes, the other things we are on the cusp of having cures. In the misery that I believe the last 16 months of really bad policy here have brought to this country, the damage inflation is doing, the damage that's going on the border of my state, the homelessness, the fentanyl. Could you imagine if this place would set aside some of the virtue signaling legislation that's saying, oh, this is going to get the other side in the next election. Oh, that just writes a great ad. And you actually brought in the engineers and the experts in our different areas that we all claim to pretend we know something about and say, here's what the future looks like. And if we get it right, the future's amazing. A little while ago, you saw a little girl behind me. I have a 6-year-old. 2 weeks ago, out of nowhere, my phone rang, and the birth mother of my little girl had a little boy. Now my wife and we have a little boy. I have a 3-week-old. It's my primary reason for running again. I got to find a way to beat this body into submission, to understand there's good things out there. But it doesn't work into our current political construct. It doesn't work into the way this place raises political money or keeps certain friends. The cures are disruptive, and the disruption is the future, and the disruption makes society healthy, better, wealthier, more productive. And that productivity solves the inflation problem. It solves so many other things. How do we move this body to stop being terrified of its own shadow and saying, screw it, we're going to do what's right, not necessarily what's easy and political? And with that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.